So maybe I start by explaining the title, or maybe you know that it's a reference to this to this event in 21 when the Evergreen was blocked in the Suez Canal. It was probably, for me, at least, one of the best meme, indeed, of the year 21. And you may already imagine the challenges in archiving this kind of phenomenon. Also, these memes were related to one event, so it's not so difficult. But if you have a look at the second part of the screen, it was when finally the boat was able to leave the Suez Canal, and there was this movement of put it back, but you can't see hashtag. But on Twitter, a lot of internet users said, okay, no, it was, it's depressing. It was so comfortable to see this boat that was blocking this canal, so put it back. It became an hashtag, but before it became an hashtag, there were plenty of messages that are very hard to retrieve or to archive. And it's a global phenomenon. So it's also quite difficult to know who at that time sought to archive it on Twitter, on other platforms, and so on. So archiving memes is, of course, a huge challenge. It is not so difficult to demonstrate that it's part of our cultural heritage, starting in the mid-90s with, for example, the dancing baby that was famous from 98, or with the Godwin's law that was explained by Godwin in Wired in 94, and which is still true, and which was circulating also through Usenet and BBS before it came also online and on fora, so there is, of course, an history of online virality. It was a project we conducted at the University of Luxembourg, which stopped a few months ago, and we wanted, of course, to rely on web archives. We did, but it's not so easy, and I want to try to draw a bit of conclusions about our experience. So I will be very short or fast on the next slide. It's an important part of our cultural heritage. There are many iterations, circulations through spaces, through time. It's a global and at the same time a local phenomenon, so it's very challenging for web archiving. It's transmedia and trans-platform, and often we have a lack of context, or it's difficult to retrieve the context, because memes, a characteristic of memes is that they are playing, always changing the context, the images, the text, and so on. You have so many occurrences that it's also quite ephemeral and difficult to follow. So it's part of our heritage. There is, in Hong Kong, a meme museum. I saw a video of it. It looks a bit disappointing, but I had no chance to visit it in Hong Kong, but so it's becoming part of museums, and it's also something which is of interest, of course, for users and producers and so on. On Reddit, for example, this question was raised of having archives of memes, and one answer that was very interesting is this one on the right. Here is a great example of a meme archive, and the user is pointing to Know Your Meme. And I want to be very clear, Know Your Meme is not an archive. It's a kind of encyclopedia. It's part of the heritagization of meme, but it's not an archive. And it's also a commercial provider of digital heritage in some ways. We were talking about ads. It's full of ads. They are looking for clicks. It's the economy of attention, and it's by no way an official archive. So there are other examples that were mentioned, and there are indeed real archive, I would say, of memes. And for example, we can mention, so it's on GIF, it's a bad example, but they are doing both memes and GIF. The Library of Congress, which started a collection, I think it was in 2017, based also of an approach of folklore, vernacular content, and so on. So there are, for example, archiving Giphy for GIF, but we will see other examples related to memes. part, of course, of this kind of content. In New Zealand, we can find also a collection that was created during the COVID crisis by the library. And you may also know about the Susho meme wall that was created by this initiative of saving the online Ukrainian heritage. And after starting to archive websites at the beginning of the war, they also created these meme walls that you can find, of course, online. So let's come to the challenges of this kind of content. This images is interesting. Sometimes the text may change, sometimes the images, and so to follow also a meme is quite complex. So we'll see how to retrieve it in archives is also in some ways challenging. Here is an example for New Zealand. So they are archiving memes, and you can see the entry memes by various and unknown creators shared online. So no authorships often, no titles, how to decide, how to also give or add metadata to this kind of content that are relevant for users. This is, of course, a huge question. But there are other questions. I'm really sorry because I didn't put the names of the author of this interesting paper related to archiving memes, but they are clearly underlining the fact that there are several levels and layers in memes, and that it's quite difficult to not only preserve them, but also to contextualize them in archives because of these layered meanings that meme may have. Of course, they are on several platforms, many of them being also difficult to preserve or to access. So I mentioned Twitter, no X. We will have a roundtable. Tomorrow there will be a roundtable about accessibility of X and the collapse of openness of IPA and so on, but it's also on Facebook, on Telegram, on Instagram, and many social networks that may not be so well archived. You have several formats. It's about text, images, macro images, and so on. So it's also, and one meme may have many formats, and so it's also, of course, challenging. You have that platform and the Rickroll, for example, with, you click on something and that's Rick Ashley singing Never Gonna Give You Up, who will appear instead of the content you are looking for. It's a famous meme going through time, through platforms, and there were examples in Wine. Wine is a closed platform. It has not been preserved, or in the press and so on. You have QR codes and so on. So it's quite challenging, and sometimes you have also this kind of Rickroll that was on Twitter. You don't know who created it. You know it was during the COVID crisis, but how do you find this content online when you are looking for a Rickroll with never will say I'm a Rickroll because you fail the prank if you explain it's a Rickroll, and how can you find it? So fortunately, sorry, I missed here was my, I can't go back, was a Rickroll on Twitter, which is not named as a Rickroll, and so you don't, so fortunately, there are, of course, archives, like a Rickroll database that was archived by Internet Archive. You can also find some examples in the INA archives in France of Rickroll, but it's just a very small part that happen in the audiovisual parameters of web archiving at INA. Here you have examples, there are videos. Then you may find also at INA examples of tweets, but there is no interoperability between both. And you may also find some in other libraries. So how to make this interoperable and have or get a representative idea of this meme is, of course, also a challenge. Searchability of such phenomena are also quite difficult. We did it with the BNF, but we could not access plain text for the Harlem Shake in 2013, so we had to search with BNF for URLs, for example, and domain names with Harlem Shake embedded within them, but you don't find through this way all contents, only the websites that were created around Harlem Shake, and there were many occurrences that were not, that were in other websites. So difficult to retrieve and to search. And I come to my ideas opening the question of what to do and how can we try to better archive these things. So first, I really think that we have with the log a great example of an entry point to this meme culture, because they are, for example, archiving meme generators. Don't forget that we need also to archive the way the people were able to create also this kind of content. So here we have context with meme generators, creators. They are also targeting some very interesting websites that are full of memes and kind of this kind of content. Of course, Know Your Meme is not an archive, but may be archived. And we have other examples like creepypasta.com and others that are quite interesting. Of course, Reddit and the others are full of this kind of memes. Then another thing is about creating eventually ontologies. This is an example by Albin Wagner, who is an expert on memes, and he's explaining, okay, there are several categories, it's quite complex, because you have Steve Carell, you have the office, but you have the topic, which is the current state of the world in 2020 and so on. So classes, characteristics, instances, occurrences, relations between several memes. We should have several boxes to put memes inside what we are looking for. Another idea would be to also build on the existing and to start with what we have in Web Archive. Sometimes we don't know, but we have plenty of memes, like we discovered with the BNF for the Harlem Shake, searching for this URLs and so on. So we should also maybe have a new look at our archives in this way. Pilot test will be very useful, related to one meme that we start to track through the archives, as we did with the Harlem Shake, but also related to one event. Can we retrieve the memes of the COVID crisis within archives of the COVID crisis? Related to one family, try to retrieve the challenges like cinnamon challenges, Harlem, not Harlem Shake, but many challenges that milk challenges and so on. Or one community history memes, for example. This will be quite interesting with a lot of challenges related to, of course, user-generated content and challenges related also to public history or to give this kind of content back to their community at some point. And I will go very fast to another thing. That was a video related to the social meme walls. It's very great that we archive memes, but we are lacking context in the social meme wall. For example, the user can't tell in the form on which platform he found the meme, which is quite important. So he will enter topic, but we need also context. Was it, for example, a retweet on X? Was it on Telegram and so on? So we can also contextualize this kind of content. We could make a test with this one. What do we enter as metadata? Should it be Bernie Sanders? Should it be related to the COVID crisis with the max? No, it's about UK and Kate, and so you see how difficult it is, and we should have a lot of boxes. And to add new challenges, it is also about all these memes that will be created by AI and circulate, and that will be also very difficult to track and to also embed in collections. So we have a new level of complexity, and it is probably time to think about the best way to capture, preserve, and give access to these contents that are so much part also of our daily life on the web and on social networks. And I stopped there.